Clay Whitehorse had 30 seconds to make an impossible choice: save the dying children and their wounded protector, or save himself. What he chose brought 300 Cherokee warriors to his door, but not for war, for something far more powerful. But first, you need to understand what Clay found in that lightning storm, because what the eagle was hiding would change 3 lives forever. And when the Cherokee Nation learned the truth, they responded in a way that would restore your faith in humanity. August 1977, Montana wilderness. Clay Whitehorse was 3 miles from shelter when the world exploded. Thunder crashed like artillery, rain turned to bullets, and somewhere in the chaos, to small voices calling for help, lightning split the Montana sky like God's own whip. And Clay Whitehorse was riding straight into the storm when he heard something that made his blood freeze. Not the wind, not thunder, crying, human crying, high-pitched, desperate, the kind of sound that cuts through storms and reaches straight into the part of your brain that remembers being helpless. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around, get to safety. The storm was getting worse, not better, and the last thing the Montana wilderness needed was another body to search for. When the weather cleared, but that crying, it was small, young, and absolutely terrified. What Clay saw next broke every rule of nature. A bald eagle, massive, magnificent, and clearly injured. One wing hung at an unnatural angle, useless, but the bird wasn't trying to escape. It was protecting something. Under its spread wing, barely visible in the storm's fury, were 2 small figures, children, Native American by their features, with long black hair plastered to their heads by rain. Girls, identical, twins, 4 years old, maybe 5, and dying. The eagle saw Clay coming and spread its good wing wider, fierce amber eyes blazing with protective fury. Even injured, even dying itself, it was guarding those children with everything it had left. Thunder crashed overhead. The rain intensified, turning from bullets to artillery shells of water that made seeing difficult and thinking nearly impossible. Clay had maybe 30 seconds before the storm got bad enough to kill them all. 30 seconds to decide. The smart thing, the safe thing, was to ride for help, get to his radio, call the sheriff, bring professionals with proper equipment and medical training. Those girls needed more help than one cowboy could provide. But 30 seconds in this storm might be 29 seconds too many. The children were already unconscious, their small bodies curled together like broken dolls. The eagle's head was drooping, exhaustion and injury finally overwhelming its fierce protectiveness. None of them would survive another hour in this weather. Clay made his choice. He dismounted, moving slowly toward the eagle, speaking in the low, calm voice he used with spooked cattle. "Easy, friend, easy. I'm here to help." The eagle's eyes tracked his movement, intelligence, and suspicion warring with desperation. It made a sound, half croak, half cry, that somehow conveyed volumes. "These are mine. I've been protecting them. Don't hurt them." "I won't," Clay said aloud, feeling slightly crazy for talking to a bird in the middle of a lightning storm. "But they're dying. We're all dying if we stay here." Another lightning strike. So close Clay felt his hair stand on end. The eagle flinched but didn't move. Clay reached into his saddlebag and pulled out the wool blanket he always carried. Moving carefully, telegraphing every intention, he approached the huddled group. The children were unconscious but breathing. Barely. Their lips were blue, their skin cold as ice. Clay wrapped them together in the blanket, lifting them as gently as he could manage. The eagle tried to follow, dragging its broken wing through the mud, refusing to abandon its charges even though it could barely move. That's when Clay made his second choice of the day, the harder one. He couldn't carry 2 children and an injured eagle. But looking into those amber eyes, eyes that held intelligence, loyalty, and a love so fierce it transcended species, Clay knew he couldn't leave it behind. This eagle had saved these children's lives, had sheltered them with its own body, kept them alive when everything else had failed. Clay wasn't going to let it die alone. He lifted the eagle carefully, feeling the powerful muscles beneath sodden feathers, the surprising lightness of hollow bones designed for flight. The bird didn't struggle. Somehow, it understood. With children in one arm and Eagle in the other, Clay managed to get back to his horse. Thunder crashed, lightning turned the world white, rain hammered down like the end of the world, and Clay Whitehorse rode toward home, carrying 3 lives he had no business being able to save. If you're already invested in this story, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because what happens next, you won't want to miss a single episode of this series. Clay's cabin had never held so much life and death at the same time. The one-room structure, built by his grandfather in 1952 and barely updated since, now served as an emergency medical center for patients he had no idea how to treat. The twin girls lay on his bed, wrapped in every blanket he owned, their small bodies sharing warmth as they fought hypothermia. With the quiet desperation of those too young to understand how close to dying they really were, the Eagle occupied the kitchen table, its massive form incongruous among salt shakers and coffee cups. Clay had fashioned a splint from kindling wood and vet wrap, the same supplies he used for injured cattle, but he had no idea if he was helping or making things worse. The storm raged outside, making communication impossible. His radio crackled with static. The phone lines had been down since the first lightning strike, so Clay did what he always did when faced with problems he couldn't solve. He worked with what he had, the children first. Basic first aid from his army days, warm blankets, body heat, careful monitoring of breathing and pulse. They were severely dehydrated, but conscious now, their dark eyes tracking his movements with the wary intelligence of those who'd learned early that adults weren't always safe. They hadn't spoken, not one word since he'd found them, but they communicated in other ways: hand squeezes, shared glances, the unconscious mirroring that identical twins often displayed. When one stirred, the other stirred. When one's breathing changed, so did her sister's. Clay had grown up hearing stories from his Cherokee grandmother, tales of spirit animals, guardians that appeared when needed most. He wasn't particularly spiritual these days. Hadn't been since Vietnam knocked most of the faith out of him. But looking at this magnificent bird, seeing how it had risked everything to protect 2 children who weren't even its own species, some things didn't need explaining, they just needed honoring. "You're not going to make this easy, are you?" Clay murmured as he examined the wing. The Eagle's amber eyes followed his every movement, alert and intelligent. The break was clean but complex, the kind of injury that would normally require veterinary surgery and months of rehabilitation. In the wild, it was usually a death sentence, but Clay had learned a few things about impossible odds as the hours passed. Clay found himself talking to his unusual patients, to the girls. He offered reassurance in the soft tone he'd once used with his own daughter before the divorce, before everything fell apart, before he'd retreated to this isolated corner of Montana to lick wounds that had never properly healed. "You're safe now," he told them as he coaxed small sips of warm broth past pale lips. "Whatever happened, wherever you came from, you're safe. Here." To the Eagle, he offered something different: respect, the kind of acknowledgement one warrior gives another. "I don't know your story, friend," he said as he checked the splint for the 3rd time. "Don't know how you ended up protecting these little ones, but I'm glad you were there. They wouldn't have made it without you." By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving behind the crystalline clarity that only comes after nature has washed the world clean. With communication restored, Clay's first call was to the sheriff. Joe Martinez had been a friend since high school, one of the few people who understood why Clay had chosen solitude over society. After coming home from the war, "Jesus, Clay," Joe's voice crackled through the radio. "You found what? Where?" "2 little girls, Cherokee, I think, maybe 4 years old. They're twins. Been through hell, near as I can tell. Any idea where they came from?" Clay looked at the children, now awake and watching him with those enormous dark eyes. No identification, no adults around, just them and a bald eagle that was protecting them. But as the day wore on, the mystery only deepened. No missing persons reports matched the twins' description. No Cherokee families in the area had reported missing children. It was as if the girls had materialized from the storm itself. The Eagle, meanwhile, was recovering with remarkable speed. By midday, It was alert and eating, accepting small pieces of fish with dignified gratitude. Late that afternoon, one of the girls finally spoke. "Ahia," she said softly, pointing at the eagle. Clay didn't recognize the word, but her sister nodded and repeated it. "Ahia." It wasn't until Dr. Sarah Running Bear arrived from the reservation that Clay understood. "Owahiwa," she said, pronouncing the word correctly. It means eagle in Cherokee. They're calling it by name. Dr. Running Bear was a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and the kind of calm competence that inspired immediate trust. She examined the children with gentle thoroughness, speaking to them in Cherokee and receiving shy but responsive answers. "Their names are Ayanna and Elisa," she told Clay after the examination. "Ayanna means eternal blossom, and Elisa means truthful. They're 4 years old, just as you thought." "Where did they come from?" Sarah's expression darkened. "That's complicated. Their parents died in a car accident 3 weeks ago. Drunk driver hit them head-on outside Billings. The girls were supposed to be placed with relatives in Oklahoma, but they ran away from the foster home the night before they were supposed to leave. No one's seen them since. The authorities assumed they died in the wilderness." Clay felt something cold settle in his stomach. 3 weeks to 4-year-old children had survived alone in the Montana wilderness for 3 weeks. How is that possible? Sarah looked at the eagle, now perched regally on Clay's kitchen counter, its amber eyes alert and watchful. "The girls say Owahiwa found them after they ran away, led them to shelter, brought them food, protected them from predators. They've been living together ever since, according to Cherokee tradition. Eagles are messengers between the physical and spirit worlds. When someone dies, especially someone young or innocent, eagles sometimes appear to guide the survivors." "You're saying their parents sent this eagle to protect them?" Sarah smiled. "I'm saying that in 3 weeks of searching, professional trackers, search and rescue teams, and state police couldn't find any trace of these children. But you found them in the middle of a thunderstorm, protected by a bird that had no earthly reason to care whether they lived or died." Clay was just settling in for the night when he heard the sound that would change everything. Drums, distant at first, barely audible over the evening wind, but growing closer, growing louder, and with them, the sound of horses, many horses. Clay stepped outside and looked toward the eastern horizon, where the first stars were appearing in the clear post-storm sky. There, silhouetted against the dying light, was something that belonged to another century. Riders, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, coming toward his cabin with the steady, purposeful pace of an army on the march. But not an army of conquest, an army of honor. Clay didn't know it yet, but word had spread through the Cherokee Nation faster than wildfire. Word of the twin girls who'd survived impossible odds. Word of the eagle that had protected them. Word of the white cowboy who'd risked his life to save them all. And now, the nation was coming to respond. All of it. Okay, pause for a second. If this story is hitting you the way it's hitting me, smash that like button. Because we're about to see what happens when an entire nation says thank you to one man's courage. Dawn came like a symphony of thunder, but this time the sound wasn't from the sky. It was hooves, 300 horses moving in perfect formation across the Montana prairie, carrying riders whose presence transformed the landscape from empty wilderness into something that pulsed with ancient power and modern purpose. Clay stood on his porch, coffee mug forgotten in his hands, watching the most magnificent sight he'd ever witnessed. The Cherokee Nation hadn't just sent representatives, they'd sent everyone. Chiefs in traditional regalia rode alongside young warriors in modern clothes. Elders who remembered the old ways shared the formation with teenagers who carried smartphones alongside sacred medicine bundles. Women, men, children, entire families had made the journey to this remote corner of Montana. And at their head rode a man Clay recognized from newspaper photos, Chief Robert Whitehorse, the youngest tribal leader in Cherokee history and one of the most respected Native American voices in the country. The riders stopped about 50 yards from the cabin, arranged in a great semicircle that seemed to embrace Clay's small homestead. Without threatening it, the silence that followed was profound. 300 people and 300 horses waiting with the kind of patience that could only come from a culture that measured time in generations. Rather than minutes, Chief Whitehorse rode forward alone, his horse's hooves marking a steady rhythm in the morning stillness. He was younger than Clay had expected, maybe 45, with silver beginning to streak his black hair and eyes that held both ancient wisdom and sharp modern intelligence. "Clay." "Whitehorse," the chief said, his voice carrying clearly in the crisp air. "I have come to thank you for saving my daughters." Clay blinked. "Your daughters?" "All Cherokee children are my daughters," the chief replied. "But Ayanna and Elisa, their father was my cousin. Their blood is my blood. Their survival is a gift beyond price." Behind the chief, the massive gathering remained motionless, waiting. Clay could feel their collective attention like a physical weight. 300 pairs of eyes focused on this moment with an intensity that made his skin prickle. "I just did what anyone would do," Clay said, his voice sounding small and inadequate. "No," the chief said, "you did what almost no one would do. You risked your life in a storm to save children who weren't yours, protected by a creature you had no obligation to help. And you did it not because it was easy, but because it was right." The chief dismounted, his movements fluid and purposeful. "May I see them?" Clay nodded and led the way inside, acutely conscious of the simplicity of his cabin compared to the magnificence outside. But Chief Whitehorse showed no judgment, only focused attention as he approached the bed where the twins were sitting up, their dark eyes wide with recognition and wonder. The chief spoke to them in Cherokee, his voice gentle and musical. The girls responded eagerly, their own voices growing stronger as they told their story in their native language. Clay couldn't understand the words, but he could read the emotions: fear, loss, gratitude, and something that might have been wonder. And through it all, the eagle watched from its perch, those amber eyes tracking every movement, every expression, as if it were the guardian of truth itself. When the conversation ended, Chief Whitehorse turned to Clay with an expression that seemed to carry the weight of history. "They tell me the eagle spoke to them," he said quietly, "in their dreams, after their parents died. It told them to run from the foster home, promised to keep them safe until help came. They say it has been their mother and father both, bringing them food, leading them to water, protecting them from harm." Clay looked at the magnificent bird, now preening its feathers with calm dignity. "Is that possible in your world?" "Perhaps not. In ours," the chief shrugged. "We have always known that love transcends death, that the spirits of those who pass watch over those they leave behind. Sometimes they send messengers." He approached the eagle, which regarded him with what appeared to be recognition. Chief Whitehorse spoke to it in Cherokee, the same gentle tone he'd used with the children. The eagle made a soft sound in response. "I have asked a Wahiwa if it wishes to return to the wild or stay with the children." The chief said, "It says its duty is not yet finished." Chief Whitehorse walked to the window, looking out at the assembled nation, waiting in respectful silence. "Do you know what it means when the Cherokee Nation rides together? Like this?" Clay shook his head. "It hasn't happened in living memory. Not since the Trail of Tears, when we were forced from our ancestral lands. But there are moments, rare moments, when something happens that reminds us who we are, who we can be, who we must be. 3 weeks ago, 2 of our children faced death, alone in the wilderness. By every law of nature and probability, they should have died. Instead, they were protected by a sacred messenger and ultimately saved by a man who chose courage over safety." He paused, letting the words settle. "That is not just a rescue, Mr. Whitehorse. That is a sign, a reminder that the old ways, the ways of honor, sacrifice, and putting others before ourselves, still have power in this world." Clay felt overwhelmed, humbled by the weight of meaning these people were attaching to what he still thought of as simple human decency. "What happens now?" Chief Whitehorse smiled, and this time it was purely joyful. "Now, we honor you as our traditions demand, and we ensure that the children and their eagle have everything they need to thrive." What followed was unlike anything Clay had ever experienced. The Cherokee Nation had not come empty-handed. As the chief led Clay outside, he saw that many of the riders carried bundles, bags, and carefully wrapped packages. Others led pack horses loaded with supplies. The children will need a home, Chief Whitehorse explained as people began dismounting and organizing themselves with practiced efficiency. According to our laws and customs, they should return to the reservation, but they have made it clear that they wish to stay with you and their eagle. Clay's heart clenched. I'm not set up for children. I live alone. I've been alone for years. Yes, the chief said simply, but you are not alone anymore. What happened next unfolded like a vision from another time. The Cherokee Nation had brought everything needed to transform Clay's simple homestead into a place suitable for raising children. Carpenters began expanding the cabin, adding bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Others started construction on a proper aviary for the eagle, large enough for it to exercise its wing as it healed, but secure enough to keep it safe. Women set up outdoor kitchens and began preparing enough food to feed an army. Children played in the yard under the watchful eyes of elders who told stories in both Cherokee and English. Teenagers unpacked boxes of clothing, toys, and books, everything to little girls would need to build a new life. And through it all, the eagle watched from its perch, occasionally making soft sounds that seemed to express approval. When the Cherokee Nation decides to act, we act completely. Dr. Running Bear smiled. Word went out 3 days ago. As soon as we realized what had happened, every family contributed something. Every person with relevant skills volunteered their time. This is what community looks like when it's working the way it's supposed to. By midday, Clay's property looked like a thriving homestead rather than a hermit's retreat. The expanded cabin had running water, electricity, and enough space for a small family. The eagle's flight pen was a masterpiece of engineering, designed to be both functional and beautiful. We've petitioned the state for emergency guardianship, Chief Whitehorse explained as they watched Ayanna and Elisa explore their new playground. Given the unusual circumstances and the children's clearly expressed wishes, it should be approved within days. But I'm not Cherokee, no, but you are family now. We have adoption ceremonies for situations like this. Clay felt something crack open in his chest, a wall he'd built around his heart after too many losses, too many disappointments. I don't know how to be a father anymore. I tried once, failed. Chief Whitehorse was quiet for a long moment, watching the twins chase butterflies, while the eagle observed from its perch. Fatherhood isn't about perfection, he said finally. It's about showing up, choosing love over fear, being willing to sacrifice for something bigger than yourself. He looked at Clay directly. You've already proven you can do that. As evening approached, the Cherokee Nation began preparing for something Clay hadn't expected, a ceremony. Not for him, but for the eagle. Owahiwa has completed a sacred trust, Chief Whitehorse explained as people gathered in a great circle around the flight pen. It answered the call of 2 children in desperate need, protected them against impossible odds, and led them to safety. Such service must be honored. What followed was unlike anything Clay had ever witnessed. Drums began a slow, steady rhythm that seemed to sync with the earth's own heartbeat. Voices rose in ancient songs that carried the weight of centuries. Sacred herbs filled the air with smoke that was said to carry prayers to the spirit world. And at the center of it all, the eagle stood motionless on its perch, head high, eyes reflecting the firelight with what could only be described as dignity. When the ceremony ended, Chief Whitehorse approached the flight pen alone. He spoke to the eagle in Cherokee, his voice carrying clearly in the hushed silence. The bird listened intently, then spread its good wing in what appeared to be acknowledgement. I have told Owahiwa that its duty is complete, the chief said to Clay. The children are safe, protected, loved. It may return to the wild or stay as it chooses. Clay looked at the magnificent bird, thinking about choice and duty, and the invisible bonds that connect all living things. What did it say? Chief Whitehorse smiled. It said it will stay until the children no longer need protection. Eagles mate for life, you know, and sometimes they adopt for life as well. If this story is reminding you why you still believe in good people, do me a favor, hit that notification bell, because this is just the beginning of Clay's journey. 6 months later, Clay Whitehorse stood in the United States Capitol, wearing an uncomfortable suit and holding the hands of 2 little girls who'd become the center of a story that had captured America's imagination. The ceremony was unprecedented, a joint session of Congress honoring a private citizen for what they called extraordinary heroism in the preservation of American values. But Clay barely heard the speeches, the applause, the flowery language about courage and community. He was too busy watching Ayanna and Elisa, now healthy, happy, and chattering in both Cherokee and English, as they took in the grandeur of the nation's most powerful building. And he was thinking about the eagle. Owahiwa had recovered completely, its wing healed and strong. But true to Chief Whitehorse's prediction, it had chosen to stay. The magnificent bird had become the guardian of the expanded homestead, watching over the children with the same fierce devotion it had shown in the wilderness. The story of the eagle, the twins, and the cowboy, as the media had dubbed it, had become more than just news. It had become a symbol. In a decade marked by political scandal, economic uncertainty, and cultural division, the tale of a man who'd risked everything to save two children, and their protector had reminded people of something they'd almost forgotten: that individual choices mattered, that honor still existed, that sometimes doing the right thing had consequences that rippled far beyond anything you could imagine. Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleagues, Congressman James Crow Dog began, his voice carrying clearly through the packed chamber. 6 months ago, 2 children faced death in the Montana wilderness. They survived because of love, the love of a sacred messenger that protected them, and the love of a man who chose their lives over his own safety. But this story is about more than rescue. It's about the America we can be when we choose compassion over convenience, when we choose community over isolation, when we choose to see children as our children, regardless of their origin or our own. Clay Whitehorse represents the best of American values, values that transcend race, religion, or political affiliation. He reminds us that heroism isn't found in grand gestures or public acclaim, but in the quiet choice to do what's right when no one is watching. And the Cherokee Nation, in their response to his actions, reminds us that the bonds of human decency are stronger than any force that seeks to divide us. When the ceremony ended, Clay found himself surrounded by politicians, reporters, and dignitaries wanting photos, quotes, and pieces of his story. But all he wanted was to go home. Home to Montana. Home to the expanded cabin where laughter echoed from rooms that had been silent for too long. Home to the eagle that greeted each dawn with a cry that sounded like joy itself. Montana welcomed them back with spring sunshine and the kind of clear air that made everything seem possible. Chief Whitehorse was waiting at the airport with a small delegation from the nation. Over the months, he'd become more than an ally. He'd become family, the grandfather the twins had needed, and the wise counselor Clay had never known he was looking for. How did it go? The chief asked as they drove through the familiar countryside. Overwhelming, Clay admitted. All those important people, all that attention, made me feel like I was representing something bigger than myself. You were, Chief Whitehorse said simply, and you did it with honor. The twins chattered excitedly in the back seat, pointing out landmarks and asking when they'd see Owahiwa. Their English had improved dramatically over the months, but they still spoke Cherokee when they were excited or scared, the musical syllables flowing like water. When they finally reached the homestead, Clay felt something settle in his chest that he'd never experienced before. The deep peace of coming home to a place where you truly belonged. The property had continued to evolve over the months. What had started as emergency construction had grown into something beautiful. A working ranch that honored both Cherokee tradition and Montana practicality. Solar panels gleamed on the expanded cabin roof. The eagle's flight pen had become an architectural marvel, large enough for soaring flight, but designed to blend seamlessly with the natural landscape. And there, perched on the pen's highest post, was Owahiwa. The eagle's cry echoed across the valley as their truck pulled into the yard, a sound of pure joy that seemed to announce to the world that the family was complete again. Ayanna and Elisa tumbled out of the truck and ran toward the flight pen, their voices lifting in Cherokee greetings that the eagle answered with soft, musical sounds. Even after 6 months, the bond between children and bird remained absolute, unbreakable. That evening, as Clay tucked the twins into their beds, Real beds in real bedrooms that smelled like lavender and childhood. Ayanna asked the question that had been coming for months. "Papa Clay," she said in her careful English, "are we going to stay here forever?" Clay sat on the edge of her bed, smoothing dark hair that still smelled like airplane snacks and important places. "Would you like to stay here forever?" "Yes," both girls said at once, their voices blending in the way only twins could manage. "Even when you're grown up, even when you have families of your own." Elisa propped herself up on her elbow, her expression serious beyond her 5 years. "This is our home. Awaiwa is here. You're here. Home doesn't change." Clay felt his throat tighten with emotion. "No, sweetheart. Home doesn't change." Later, after the children were asleep, Clay stood on the porch, with Chief Whitehorse, watching stars emerge in the vast Montana sky. Awaiwa perched nearby, a silent sentinel keeping watch over the family it had claimed. "The media attention will die down eventually," the chief said quietly. "The politicians will move on to other causes. But what you've built here, this will last." Clay nodded, thinking about legacy and the invisible threads that connect generations. The twins want to start a wildlife rehabilitation center when they're older, specifically for injured eagles. Chief Whitehorse smiled. "Of course they do. Awaiwa has taught them that healing is a form of love." "Is that what this has all been about? Love? What else could it be? You loved 2 children enough to risk your life in a storm. Awaiwa loved them enough to sacrifice its freedom. The Cherokee Nation loved them enough to transform your life. Love creates more love." Always, as if summoned by their conversation, the eagle spread its magnificent wings, fully healed now, powerful enough to carry it anywhere it chose to go. But instead of flying away, it settled more comfortably on its perch, amber eyes reflecting the porch light. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd made different choices that night," Clay said. "If I'd turned around, gone for help, instead of trying to save them myself, they would have died." Chief Whitehorse said matter-of-factly. "All 3 of them, and you would have lived the rest of your life knowing you chose safety over love." Clay considered this. "And now you live knowing that love chose you. That 2 children have a future because you were brave enough to be better than practical. That an entire nation was reminded of what we can be when we choose to see beyond ourselves." 3 years later, the Whitehorse Wildlife Rehabilitation Center opened its doors. Built on the same land where Clay had once lived in solitude, the center specialized in the care and rehabilitation of injured eagles. But it was more than just a medical facility. It was a teaching center, a place where Cherokee children learned traditional stories about the relationship between humans and the natural world, where non-native visitors gained new understanding of indigenous values and wisdom. Ayanna and Elisa, now 8 years old and confident in both their Cherokee heritage and their Montana identity, served as the center's youngest ambassadors. They could explain the life cycle of bald eagles in 3 languages, demonstrate traditional Cherokee healing techniques, and charm visitors with stories of their own rescue that had grown into legend. And at the center of it all was Awaiwa. The eagle had become something unprecedented in wildlife rehabilitation. A bird that chose to remain in human care not because it had to, but because it wanted to. Its flight pen was always open during daylight hours. It could leave anytime it chose. Instead, it had become the center's greatest teacher. Visitors watched in amazement as the magnificent bird worked with injured eagles brought to the center, demonstrating flight techniques to those learning to fly again, offering comfort to those still healing. Clay just called it family. The center also served another purpose that had evolved naturally over the years. It had become a place where lost children found their way home. Native American children aging out of foster care, kids from broken homes who needed a place to heal, teenagers struggling with identity and belonging. They all found their way to the rehabilitation center, drawn by something they couldn't quite name but desperately needed. Clay found himself parenting not just Ayanna and Elisa, but a constantly changing population of young people who needed to learn what the twins had learned. That love could transcend loss, that healing was possible, that some families were chosen rather than born. On the center's 3rd anniversary, as Clay watched a dozen children of various ages and backgrounds work together to care for recovering eagles, He thought about the night that had changed everything. One storm, one choice, one act of courage, in the face of impossible odds. And from that single moment, a legacy that would outlast them all. A Waiiwa cried out from its perch, a sound that had become the center's unofficial anthem. The children looked up, smiled, and continued their work. Cherokee kids and Crow kids and white kids and black kids, all united by the understanding that some things were worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth building a life around. As evening settled over the Montana prairie, Clay called the center's residents together for their daily gathering, a tradition that blended Cherokee ceremony with the practical needs of running a wildlife rehabilitation facility. What did we learn today? He asked, the same question he'd been asking for 3 years. Hands shot up around the circle. Eagles mate for life, but they also adopt. Healing takes time, but it's always possible. Family isn't just blood, it's choice. Love creates more love. Clay nodded at each answer, his heart full with the knowledge that these children would carry these lessons into the world, would become healers and teachers and protectors in their own right. And what's our promise? He asked. The voices rose. Together, Cherokee and English blending in the mountain air, to protect what cannot protect itself, to heal what has been broken, to choose love over fear, always. As the children scattered to their evening chores, Ayanna and Elisa lingered by Clay's side, no longer the desperate, frightened children he'd found in a storm, but confident young women who knew exactly who they were and what they stood for. Papa Clay, Elisa said, using the title she'd given him years ago. Do you think a Waiiwa knows how many people it saved by protecting us? Clay looked at the eagle, now 16 years old and still magnificent, still vigilant, still utterly devoted to the family it had claimed in a lightning storm. I think it knows exactly what it did, he said, and I think it knows it's still doing it every single day. A Waiiwa spread its wings in the fading light, not to fly away, but to embrace the world it had chosen to protect. And in that gesture, Clay saw everything that mattered, the power of sacrifice, the persistence of love, and the truth that some bonds transcend species, logic, and time itself. The eagle had saved the children, Clay had saved them all, and together, they had built something that would save countless others. Love, creating more love, always. One storm, one choice, one act of courage that rippled outward to create a legacy that will outlast us all. If this story restored your faith in the power of one person's choice to change the world, I need you to do 3 things. Subscribe to this channel. Tell us in the comments about a time someone chose to help you when they didn't have to. And share this story, because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear that heroes still exist in the quiet, places where no cameras roll. Thanks for spending time with us today. If this story meant something to you, pass it on. This is Still Standing Souls, real stories, quiet strength, lasting hope.